actually see um, my presentation on your screen. That'd be quite useful. Getting thumbs ups out there? Excellent. So after that preamble, welcome everyone and thank you for attending. I know it's a topic of high interest. As a CTO of Online, I do have responsibilities for a number of things. One of them is our innovation lab. And a lot of what I'm talking about today comes from that innovation lab. It's experience that we've got in research we've done for a number of years, as well as experiences with our clients. Generative AI is an extremely broad topic. It is useful in a wide variety of situations, wide variety of applications from general to specific. And I'm going to cover a number of those aspects with regards to the work that we actually do and the research that we do, and a bit about the market demand as well. But I'm not going to answer all of the questions you may have. I'll do my best probably in the Q&A. This is such a broad topic, it's almost impossible to cover the entirety of it. But I'll with that preamble, I'll do my best to continue. So online business systems has been in business for a long time. I'm not going to go through this entire slide other than to highlight the areas where we see generative AI having an impact. We see it in our digital advisory services where we work with our clients to identify opportunities for technology like generative AI. We see it a lot in customer engagement. We do large scale contact center work and other interaction work. We see it in our digital studio where we're doing application design development. And we see it in our service management practice as well. And because generative AI has many impacts across the board, cybersecurity and risk security and privacy are important aspects of it. I'll work in some of the commentary in as well. And it all comes together in AI and data services in the middle. So I'm briefly going to talk about what is generative AI. I'm going to move quite quickly through it, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But I want to spend some time talking about the state of generative AI and its capabilities and its adoption rate and how it's changing things. Talk a little bit about how do you identify as use cases for opportunity for generative AI, and then go into a discussion about how we actually use it and where we're seeing usage for ourselves and for our clients. Talk a little bit about a little proof of concept work that we've developed for this space, and close off with some thoughts at the end and move on to questions. So what is generative AI? One thing I would recommend to all the viewers is to go and take a look at the presentation that David Gerhard, head of computer science, U of M, gave back in October 17th of 2023. It does an extremely good job of going through the history and the capability in a very interesting fashion. He did such a good job of it. I'm going to kind of skim the waves a little bit on the definitions for generative AI. And I'm going to kind of keep it at a level of talking about how could you think about it as regards to being used by business. Gartner has been covering generative AI now for a period of time. They have their definition. The terms that we use here at Online, as we talk about generative AI as a new form of AI, been under development since 2018 with the introduction of transformer technology primarily, and it achieved mass usage in 2023, mostly through ChatGPT usage and people actually experimenting with it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. It emulates the following skills, and we'll use the word emulate here. In that it's not a true intelligence yet. There is some debate, but not for me yet. It is so useful at creating new things. It is very useful creating new text, new images, new audio. It's a creation machine. But it's not just a creation machine. It allows you to interpret and reason about text and images. You can analyze and explain and error check. You can do a wide variety of tasks using generative AI and with models such as OpenAI's GPT-4 or any other models I'll be talking about. And one of the things that the large language models, specifically around generative AI, have embedded within them is general knowledge. They have compiled, and that's the word I will use roughly, they have compiled terabytes and terabytes of information, mostly scraped from the web, to create a very big, for lack of a better word, brain that knows a lot about a lot of things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But one of the neat things about generative AI is that it can use all of that general knowledge that it has compiled. And you can use it in a way where you don't have to necessarily provide your own data to have it examine or carry out tasks for you. It can do a heck of a lot out of the box, which is very important, and what leads to a lot of the work that I'll be talking about later on. But it can also be fine-tuned with your own data. You can work your own data into generative AI to make useful systems, and you can refine, depending upon which models you use, the skills and the knowledge which will be used. So I want to talk a little bit about what is the state of generative AI and adoption and what its capabilities are. 170 plus million people have used ChatGPT in the first 2 months after its release. So this is going back some time. This is the mass adoption. ChatGPT is being used by a lot of people, and the usage of ChatGPT has raised the awareness across a large population of people as to what things can be done. And the adoption rate for generative AI is astounding. And here I would say, not just for the large language models, such as OpenAI's large language model GPT-4, but into the image creation and generation around stable diffusion. Everybody's been using it to some extent. And when they use it to explore what can it actually do. They work with it to find out what can I actually do with this thing. And the big change when you're using ChatGPT, if you haven't yet, is that as opposed to using a Google search, you answer questions with ChatGPT instead of search for answers. So you're not searching for answers for a particular question, like how do you wire up a sump pump? Just a bad example. You're actually asking, how do you wire up a sump pump? And it'll do its best to try and answer you. So there's a little bit of a change in interaction. It can be used for planning. It's fantastic at coming up with agendas. It's fantastic with coming up with project plans. And it's really good at summarization and creation. So if you've got documents with a lot of knowledge within them, whether they're policy documents or other documents, research and development documents, you can summarize and extract a lot of information from them. And then you can actually go and create a lot of information with it. This adoption curve on the right shows that generative AI is being adopted at a faster rate than even smartphones. So people are using it, and I'll get into why they're using it in a little bit. These are the primary reasons. These are just some of the capabilities that you get with a generative AI solution, such as using ChatGPT. Text generation, you can create headlines, you can do product descriptions, you can do conversational responses. It's great at that. As I said, if you feed it lots of information, which you might have a hard time reading through and summarizing, it can do a really good job of taking a big document and compiling it and extracting what are the key topics or key pieces of information from it if you ask it in the right way. It can translate text between several languages, which we use in some of our applications where in a conversation, maybe you want to say, hey, could we continue this conversation in French? And it'll try and accommodate you. It'll now start talking to you in French. You can extract information from text. So if you want to find where the names within an article, what names or companies are within there, you can pull that information out with one prompt. You can do creative writing prompts, a fantastic way to get started if you're having a hard time figuring out what to write. You can classify textual data into categories. I've used that personally. Given a bunch of client names, let's say in this case, I had a bunch of client names of companies which are in the US. I asked ChatGPT to guess what industry category they may be in. And it did a pretty darn good job. It did a good job of guessing that the ag companies were ag companies, that manufacturing companies were manufacturing companies. So if you don't have that data right at your fingertips, you can get ChatGPT to do it for you. You can load your own data to different large language model tools and actually have it analyze it for you using a combination of code generation and execution. You can do search. If you have large documents or a large number of documents, you can use different text embeddings and vectored databases to actually do semantic search. So you're not searching on keywords necessarily anymore. You can be searching on concepts. You can be searching on, hey, tell me within a product database, what items here are associated with floating in water. And just that description, floating in water, it might come back to you with a bunch of things, including boats, canoes, life jackets, things of that nature. So it becomes more semantic. It is fantastic at code generation and helping out with development. It can do code writing. I'll talk about that in a bit more, debugging, and explain programming concepts. And a real strength is it has conversational abilities. You can talk with it. It'll recognize the intents that you've had, which has been somewhat difficult to do in the past up until the arrival of large language models. You can do it in a far more straightforward fashion using the large language models and detect the sentiment of a conversation. So if somebody's having a bad day or saying bad things to you, or they're having a good day saying good things to you, it can easily analyze, oh, this is a conversation that's going well or it's going bad. And that can be used in a wide variety of ways. So how would you identify what use cases you could use for generative AI? And it's actually pretty broad. Um, when you have a lot of information which you are processing, which has been created in a language, let's say English, let's say other languages, or it's a language like software written in development languages, whatever it is, you can use generative AI to help create those systems. And the inverse, you can use generative AI to make sense of that information. So you can provide it code snippets or sections of code and ask it to explain, what is this code doing? And it'll do a pretty good job of explaining what it's doing. I've seen that in evidence with a good number of our junior developers. It's been very beneficial. It's increasingly multimodal. You can take charts and graphs and diagrams and images, which I do on a pretty regular basis, and you can feed it in just as images into large language models and have it understand what the graph is and maybe even recreate the graph in different languages, which is pretty impressive. So from a business trigger point of view, if your business creates any of these things, whether they're email correspondence, which there's a topic coming up there, I know, whether it's any other form of correspondence, it can be beneficial in writing that type of correspondence. If you've got business processes which use any of these things, you can insert generative AI to help you carry out a process successfully, to help out a person do their job as they evaluate different pieces of information. And it can do it in a very, very scalable way. And the one example I might use on the scalability side is if you generate a lot of images or do a lot of graphic art work like that, you can generate images and graphic art pretty quickly using generative AI. It may not be perfect, but you can do it actually pretty fast and get a pretty impressive boost in your productivity. And it's fantastic at unstructured data. It's fantastic at conversations. In other words, the transcripts of conversations, at case notes, reports, submissions, documents, things like that. They are unstructured, but they have some structure within them. And generative AI can really be beneficial in those instances. So, to try and ideate as to what could it actually do for me, the generative AI tools, in this case, I'm using ChatGPT 4+. They can do some pretty impressive things out of the box just talking to them. In this case, which is the top of the diagram, I uploaded an image of somebody's room. It looks like a living room. And then I asked it at the top on the right, if you take a look, please create a detailed list of all the household items that are in this picture. Okay. And it goes through. And it actually provides a pretty darn good list of what it sees. I'll highlight it sees a coffee table. It sees a large flat screen television on a media console. It sees a lot of things like speakers. And it even provides a little bit of commentary on the design of the room and what choices may have been made. It's got a contemporary design. So that is a lot that is done in 2 minutes or less. Take a picture, get that list. So what can you do with something like that? What's a real use case, right? Well, if you wanted to, you could create a system that provides a comprehensive list of what your personal assets are. We all think we know what we have in our houses and our shops and all the rest of that. But in times of an emergency, such as whether it's disaster, such as a fire or something of that nature, it doesn't jump to the top of your head. What exactly did I actually have in my house? Well, here's a system or a method that you could actually get a personal inventory pretty darn quick. And that's useful not just for disasters, but it can be useful for other things like, documenting an estate, things like that. And then, but you can take it further. You can create a system that applies elements of logic to that list. So if I wanted to get a little bit more detailed, hey, analyze that TV again. Is that a 65 inch or an 84 inch? Maybe take a guess at what its price might be. You can start to work in other types of use case and start getting interesting value. So that's an impressive example to get some ideas from. Here's another just for fun that I put in, which is the power of the recognition is getting stronger and stronger. So I uploaded this image, and I had ideas as to what this image was, like what was going through my mind as to what the thing was. And then I asked it, okay, what is this? And I find out from ChatGPT, well, it isn't what I thought it was. I thought it was a submerged boat. I thought it was on the water and there are trees reflected. I thought this was some kind of boat. No, ChatGPT could recognize, no, that's actually an external part of a car. And actually what it is, it's a broken antenna on a car. And maybe you need some assistance with car repairs if you got a broken antenna, so it beneficially inserts that in there. So the reasoning is getting stronger and stronger. Like that, the language side of it coupled with the image processing side, just to get your thoughts going. The one use case that jumps to mind when it comes to generative AI is, how will it affect software development? And it will. It will affect software development in a large way. And the forecasts are it will impact not just the development process itself of software, but how AI gets incorporated into the entire process as you create these AI-based systems. So there's going to be an evolution in developer usage, and that's required for this advanced kind of adoption. And there will be a new stack of tools and skills that people will undertake. They'll make them more productive and it'll be beneficial. We're going to learn things like, how do we work with our AI system? How do we create applications? Maybe not just from a code level, but even beyond that, from a requirements definition through to specification, through to generation. There'll be a big change. And my assumptions in this space are that generative AI is really going to be impacted in conversational applications. So any of the chatbots you may have interacted with, or virtual assistants you may have interacted with, generative AI is going to be heavily penetrating those capabilities. Chatbots have been built in a different technology to this point. I'm not saying it's bad, but they're going to be enhanced. They're going to be enhanced with the reasoning and language processing capabilities that a generative AI system like OpenAI or Llama or any of the other models have. And that is going to be arriving extremely quickly. And I'd say almost at an operating system level, there are a number of proposals out there sort of saying, hey, can we change the nature of my interaction with my operating system on my machine? And Microsoft has been releasing things such as Windows Copilot, so that you speak to it, you speak to your operating system, and things get accomplished in that fashion. So it kind of represents a step along the way of almost an interface change going across the world. Marketing departments are going to be using some form of generative AI for doing image creation, analysis, creating videos, big advances in video creation, big advances in audio creation, which we have experimented with and actually done some impressive stuff. And text, extremely strong in text. And I think that's happening right now. I think it's really going to make a big impact. And then application developer teams will be using generative AI to assist with the architecture, code creation, and maintenance of their systems. It's going to become a part of their daily lives, and it's going to be arriving pretty quick. Which brings me to our usage. How do we actually, at Online, as we do either our innovation lab work or work on behalf of our clients, how do we actually use these generative AI aspects and portions? First things from a models and languages point of view. We use the proprietary models of OpenAI, and we have for quite some time now. We used other models before that, including BERT or more open source models in the old days. These proprietary models they're large, they're advanced, and they're extremely capable, and they can do a lot of things. And in many ways, they are like what you would call, they would be in the lead in capabilities of using generative AI. But they are proprietary. You just talk to them through prompts and API. You don't see what's kind of behind the curtain. And with the arrival of Llama from Meta, they weren't the only ones, but they're the ones kind of starting off and giving credibility to the open source revolution around creating open source large language models. So we see a lot of Llama, Mistral we've been using more recently, Falcon. These are open source large language models, which are being pushed in an open source by an open community very largely. There's a site called Hugging Face, if you haven't heard of, that has many thousands of these models and is helping drive that evolution. And that is the thing. The evolution is being driven by so many people participating. So an example for myself, I've got probably 5 or 6 open source large language models existing on my machine, which I run and test, and we use that in testing. And their capabilities they're rapidly kind of catching up or closing the gap between the proprietary models and the open source models. So it's something that we track. And no surprise, Meta and Mr. Zuckerberg, he continues to push the open source side, the new versions of Llama 3. And my guess is, to a large extent, he's trying to drive the metaverse and interactions with the metaverse using things such as his Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses and things of that nature. I won't go too much into that. That's a big topic on its own. And how we use these models. We take a look at the proprietary models, and we basically create a roster of strength or skills that model actually has. And then we use the model which is appropriate for the task. For us, what we found to this point is GPT-4. It's very strong in conversational AI, and it's good in reasoning ability. So we use it extensively. But at the same time, we experiment with the other models, such as Llama and Mistral. They're smaller models. They can be speedier, and you can mix and match the models the way I've got it listed on the bottom there to try and use the model for what it's strong at. So some of the open source models, maybe you're using them because they're a bit speedier for a very small activity, and it doesn't cost you quite as much. Maybe you're using GPT-4 for a bigger problem space to take advantage of its strengths, but you're trying to balance off kind of ability versus cost and execution. We've been using GitHub Copilot at Online now for probably since it came out, and we've been using it internally for our own internal systems development, and now we're using it for some of the product development work that we do for our clients. And our developer population, which is a mix of seniors, intermediates, more junior to intermediate, they're using GitHub Copilot, and they find it very powerful. They find it powerful for learning new languages. So if you're a good developer, but you don't know React and TypeScript necessarily, you can actually get up to speed pretty quick, or Python as another example. You can scaffold many code scenarios, including the dependencies between your code. You can do that very, very quickly. You can even have it write unit tests, sometimes even with mocked up services. So it can do a lot of the work on behalf of the developer, but the developer is using Copilot as an assistant to try and become more productive and do the things they're good at, the creative side of it, and leave a lot of the plumbing side of it, or the stuff that doesn't necessarily get done, whether that's comments. Try and use Copilot and to take advantage of that. So our team, consequently, they get up to speed faster. They learn best practices for usage and prompting. I'm going to go into prompting a little bit later, but the way that you ask a question is kind of important when you're using generative AI. And we see a big increase in productivity. It's very fascinating to see the speed at which this is moving. Here's an adoption example at online. Way back when, probably 2018, even before, I had the idea of I wanted to take documents that we had online as an example, but documents in general. I'll call them policy documents. What I wanted to do is create a policy document and create a chatbot which would be able to answer some questions about a policy document. Now, the example I used here as a policy document was our own internal onliner guidebook. We've got a nice guidebook. It's a PDF file. It's a Word file. And really, that spells out the benefits and the way that onliners are to operate within our company. And to try and create a system where onliners could actually ask that system questions about, let's say, things such as benefits coverage in the broad from that document, or basically to answer the easy questions that, let's say, our people care or human resources folks wouldn't necessarily, they can answer those questions, but it's not necessarily the best use of their time. And so we started off using some technologies in 2018, whatever was the state of the art at the time, spacey and named entity recognition, classic natural language processing tool sets in 2018. We created something that was okay, wasn't that good. And then things started to change with the arrival of large language models, Llama, in this case, along with some fine tuning with LoRa, to actually improve what we could do with the document. So in other words, answer the questions better, be more relevant. That ability started to happen. And now we see with the arrival of the large language models on the platform, such as in this case, it's Azure AI and Azure Cognitive Search, we can now create not just applications which would answer questions about a particular one document, but about many documents which represent whether it's training or guidance or things of that nature. You can create a system which will use that as a source and provide intelligent answers to questions that you may pose to it. So it's a good use case. And for us and many clients, it's a good use case because it's kind of a low risk step. It's an internal usage thing. You can try it out. People may like it or may not like it, but for the most part, internal usage, people are a little bit more forgiving as opposed to putting it out into the public eyes. Another example, more in the customer experience space, would be using generative AI to help human agents, help call agents. In this case, this represents the call recordings that come out of customer support desk. So when you phone contact center and it says, hey, this is going to be recorded for training purposes, we take those call recordings, we turn them into text using a service, and then we will take those transcripts and we will apply generative AI to do things such as automatic call summarization. So instead of having your agent spend half an hour to 45 minutes, depending upon the nature of the call, writing up what the transcript or the summary is, you can have the generative AI write up that summarization for you and save you some time. You still check it, but it'll save you some time. But the other thing it can do is it can do topic categorization. So based on a transcript, it can characterize what was the nature of that call when somebody phoned in. What were they complaining about? Or what did they need help with? What product did they need help with? So how do you categorize where you're getting calls? All this summarization and categorization can help a service center understand where are the questions coming from? What are they about? Take that data. Maybe we have to improve a product. Maybe we have to do apply a little bit more education to help people understand how products work. But it's very useful. And generative AI really speeds up the creation of this type of a system. In the contact center, again, we have a customer engagement practice where we do a lot of contact center work for a lot of pretty big clients. And the classic example of that in a contact center you may want to do is have something like an interactive voice agent, something akin to a chatbot, which could answer a call that a client makes and talk to the client in a voice way and extract information from that client. In this case, the client wants to file an insurance claim. This is an insurance use case. And the generative AI application can extract the information that it needs from the conversation and actually generate all of the prompts that it needs for that conversation. And it can do the natural things such as, how do we make some corrections to what has been said? Oh, I said that I wanted to see if I could have brace coverage for my child. Well, maybe you can't, but it will allow you to validate and verify that you actually do have coverage for that. And so in a scenario of contact center usage, at the end of you interacting with this generative AI, I'll call it a robot, you can do some things. You can make some decisions as a business. Hey, maybe there's enough here for me to actually move a claim through to be processed. Or you can make a decision such as, you know what, I'm going to hand this off to a human agent who's going to do the last mile check and make sure everything's okay. But either way, you can alleviate a lot of the more common pieces of work and improve a workflow and decrease the time it takes to service that. In this case, my example here, we achieved this using Five9, which is a cloud contact as a service structure, coupled to Google Cloud and OpenAI on the back end. And there's a little, on YouTube, there's a demo if you want to go into much further detail. But when it comes to creating these type of applications, you need to be aware of some limitations. An example here on the upper right here is the National Eating Disorders Association in the States. Many people may have heard of this. They created an AI chatbot. That AI chatbot, in some way, shape, or form, was based upon many of the conversations and transcripts that they'd had with people who were phoning in to get support about eating disorders and the problems that they're having with their eating disorder. But they had to turn this thing off pretty quick. They wouldn't go into full rationale as to why they had to turn it off pretty quick. They didn't provide the specific examples of what advice was offered. Tessa was what this robot was called. But social media posts indicate that the chatbot urged one user to count calories and try to lose weight after the user told the tool they had an eating disorder. Now, that's not good. Like that first do no harm. That's not good. That's just bad advice. But you get deceived into thinking that you can just easily create this application because they appear so intelligent in your interactions with them that they would understand. Hey, don't provide advice like that. That's bad advice. But you think it's smarter than it is because it is seductive when you're using it. But it's not itself an enterprise application. That development is sort of done outside. The intelligence that it has, as I said, is emulated. It to a large extent, it's statistical. So, but you can create chatbots which will do work similar to this. But you need to enable those chatbots through very strict guidance and training on what can be said, on what and absolutely what should not be said, and what topics are good for the conversation and what topics aren't good for a conversation. So you need to create the system with those guardrails in place, and it needs ongoing oversight. People need to be monitoring it to making sure it's not going off the rails or not carrying out its actions correctly. Working with LLMs, large language models themselves, and here I'm talking mostly about GPT-4, but also some of the other ones. We get a lot of our work accomplished through prompt engineering. Prompt engineering basically is is the prompt that you give to the large language model. And you can ask the prompt when you start using things such as ChatGPT, you can ask it all sorts of questions. And depending upon the way you ask the question, you get a good answer. But you can ask the question in a wrong way and you can get a bad answer. And sometimes it becomes a little bit of artistry to ask the question in exactly the right way to get the result that you want. And so the analogy I use is that it's a bit of a, we think of it as a wizard's incantation. That's the way I talked about it about a year and a half, 2 years ago. The words of the prompt hold immense power to shape the output from the language model. What words you use to feed in can really change the way that language model is going to behave and reason. I'll use the word reason loosely here. And the spell book itself, these book of spells, incantations, it's evolutionary. It depends on which model of a large language model you're using, whether you're using, let's say, GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, or whether you're using any of the open source models. They each have different capabilities, and they each have different prompts, which result in different outputs. So you need to be very much aware of that, as we are. There are levels of control and heat for hallucination. So out of the box, large language models want to answer your question. That is how they're motivated. They want to answer your question. And they will get really creative about answering your question to the point of, if you were to ask the large language model a question and it gave you an answer, and you were to ask, hey, can you give me citations or references which might support that? It'll say sure, and it'll give you references and citations to support what it thought. But here's the problem: depending upon the heat or how accurate you want it to be, if it's really creative, it's going to invent references out of the blue that don't exist, but they sound like they support it. So you got to be on top of the answers it's going to give. It's very creative. You have to control the creativity to a large extent, but you can't control it so much that you don't get the benefit of the generation. An example here on this wizard's prompt side here is, if you use the prompt obtain the user's name instead of ask the user for their name. If you ask the user for their name and you don't get a name, you've satisfied the directive of ask for the name, because that's what it did. It just didn't get the name. If you say obtain the user's name, it will work and won't proceed until it actually gets the user's name. It's just a small example. We've got more examples on our generative AI site. So for ourselves, for showcasing things, we've created our own tooling around creating these types of applications. So this is not a piece of software that we're selling. It's just something that we use for our own internal usage, exploration, and development. Because what we want to do is we want to easily create goal-directed conversations that are actually guided. They are guided to stay on topic, the problem I was describing earlier. They're guided to saying, hey, don't say bad things, and then monitoring it to make sure it's not saying bad things, and try and create these systems quickly while leveraging the power of the large language model itself. So you don't want it so constrained that your code basically just becomes procedural code all the way through. You want to use the power of it, but it's a balancing act. This tool is designed to be generic and abstract. We want to use it for multiple applications, from a website to a contact center access or anything like that. And we want it to be able to basically conduct conversations on behalf of a client application. So it can be kind of integrated into a client application. And I want to walk very quickly through one of the modules that we created as an example, just to get you a feel. So we created one module for something called an elder care bot. And this is to gather information from a user who is trying to come up with a plan for how to approach managing the elder care for their loved one. What are the important things that need to be accumulated? And how does journaling actually work? So it is a guided conversation to achieving a task, and you want to stay on task. And at the end of the guided conversation, you actually want to be able to keep on talking, but generate reports on an ongoing basis for the data that you've created. In this example, I'm going to be walking through. This is going to look like a screen flow. In this case, I'm talking to MindTXN, and I ask it to do the elder care module, which I talked about before. And the model I'm going to use this time is OpenAI GPT-4 Turbo. And in this case, I'm running on Azure. And I get a nice greeting. It says, hey, we're going to work together on coming up with an elder care module and a plan. And one of the things it says is, hey, do you want to do a baseline assessment, which basically gathers all the information that it needs to actually do this type of planning? And I say, let's start with a baseline assessment. That's my reply at the bottom there. And it says, hey, absolutely, Tim. Let's get going. We're going to do a baseline assessment. Here's the type of information I'm going to be extracting from you. So that's just like, it's not saying, give me all that now. It's just saying, I'm going to be going through this. I'm going to be extracting this information from you. And I say, okay, yeah, I'm fine. I'm willing to talk with you about personal information, medical history, living situation, etc. And then it says, hey, great. Let's begin with personal information. Could you please provide the following details about your family member? It wants the full name, date of birth, typical stuff you'd enter into a form. And I reply with one line, Joe Smith, January 11th, 1937, 150 Whistledown Avenue, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Now I checked, none of these things exist, and I'm glad about that. But after replying to it, I just want you to notice it says, okay, thanks for providing me with that information. And what it's done is it's matched up all of the information I provided in one line against the appropriate pieces of information it wants to get. So, but it says, hey, you still haven't given me his phone number. And I said, okay, here's his phone number, which I blanked out. And he's got he has no email. Now it's filled out its form. I got the information I need. I can keep on going to get more information. And it asked me for more information, emergency contacts. And I'm doing the same thing here. It asks me for what medications does he have? He's got high blood pressure, no illnesses or surgeries. His primary physician is this. He's on some form of a statin. I don't specify what. I just say it's a statin because it asked me for drug information. And it took the information I provided in that one line, applied it correctly, but it knows enough to know you didn't actually give me the name of the statin or its dosing. So it's asked me, hey, I need that information. And I say, okay, he's on this statin. That's its name, rosuvastatin. He takes 10 milligrams daily. And he's allergic to peanuts. And his doctor's phone number is this. Okay, it's got its information. It can keep on going. And we can keep on continuing. So you get the idea. It's a guided conversation. It's getting the information from me. It's not letting me kind of veer off, but it's actually a pretty good interface. And it's all generative AI enabling this. Once the baseline is completed, the information is stored and for future reference, and we can generate reports for summarization of that data. And we actually start the journaling process of how you daily interact with your loved one. So I have some other thoughts here around generative AI and more associated with data. I'm creating systems which access backend data, and in some way, shape, or form, that data is being used within a generative AI system. Now, if I've got bad data on the back end, that I will get a bad robot, which is what I've got drawn here by ChatGPT to do this for me. And you don't want a bad robot. You want a good robot. So you're counting on data being good. And so for whichever thing you're going to try and explore of your own data to try and use for generative AI, the same rules apply that apply if you're analyzing your data for doing business intelligence work. It's the same thing. It's the same benefits, and you see the same symptoms of bad symptoms of not having a good data strategy. So whatever data you're going to have participating in the generative AI initiative, you've got to have good answers on it. It's got to be good and clean, and you need to take that approach. Another parting thought is around, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube is what I call it. Everybody's using it, and the guidelines for usage are required. But we have, I'd like to highlight here, we've got our own created RSP guidelines for security policies using generative AI. That's an important thing to get in your hands. And if you're looking at custom applications, you need to think about where it's going to be hosted, how it's going to be trained, the bias within the data or the bias within the data of the LLM you're using. Where does the data actually come from? The provenance, which is becoming more important. Where did that large language model get its data from? And the other things I'm talking about, guardrails to ensure goodness of communication, jailbreaking. Attentions are needed. It's not as straightforward. ChatGPT is somewhat, as I said, it's seductive. It makes you think it can do a heck of a lot, and it can, but it needs guidance. So where do we go from here? Well, what I'd say is get an acceptable use policy for your company. It's important that you understand how you should or should not be able to use generative AI in your work. Use it for and explore it for the proven use cases I talked about: code generation, image analysis, idea exploration, any of the items listed in the capabilities I talked about. And then start ideating. You can explore a lot of use cases extremely rapidly and for not very much money. And so I'd like to thank you for running a bit long. I've got an address here for our generative AI and large language model resource center, where we've got some pretty good docs there going through in more detail than what I went through about what generative AI can do for you. And I'd like to thank you. So now I will unshare.
Thank you very, very much, Tim. That was amazing. I kept thinking about even our own association in terms of like how to get started. We've had conversations. We have someone on our team now who is looking at our data and getting a data strategy, cleaning up our data for us, especially around membership engagement. And so that seems like a logical place for us to get started. But lots of people and lots of different organizations, I'm sure, having very similar thoughts to my own, which is, how do I prepare? How do I get started? So that presentation really gave me insight into acceptable use policy, keep going with what we're doing with the data strategy, and then figure out internal ways in particular to start experimenting. And I really loved your case study example of the guidebook, the employee guidebook. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to have a look over at the tab that says Q&A, and it looks like we have 2 questions. And they're both excellent. And the first one says, if you load data from your organization to a tool like ChatGPT, how might you safeguard your information? Is that possible?
Well, ChatGPT came out with something called ChatGPT Teams within the last week and a half, where they say, as a company, if you've got members who are using ChatGPT Teams, we're not taking your data. We're not going to use the questions or the data that you upload and then use them in the training of the next model. So that's their commitment. I don't know enough to know, and I didn't think our RSP security folks have looked at it yet. What I do, my best practice in our policy guide is pretty good on this as well. If you really want to analyze the data, you obfuscate the data. Like you do whatever you can to make your data opaque. In other words, no customer names, no nothing else, right? You just try and no identifying information. You can still do analysis, but no identifying information. That's one way. If it's text you want, and you want to write, let's say you want to analyze an email, right? Now, a lot of the times an email's got identifying information in it, and the analysis of it actually on GPT would be bad. Okay, I will insert one more way. I have local large language models running on my machine. I use those large language models here. When it's all on my machine, I'm not calling any cloud service, and the data then is good, right? So you need to be aware. A broad generality when you're using something such as OpenAI GPT is don't put anything up there that you wouldn't want to see on a tweet or a Facebook feed. Right? Because you think about it the same way as your social network or social software policy would be.
Those are great tips. Looks like our last one is from Daniel. And the question is, could businesses use their security camera footage to calculate inventory instead of manually counting it? How far away might that be?
You know, a lot of the work that we, so I'll just qualify this. A lot of the work that we do is associated around the textual side. The image side is fascinating. And I know of companies here locally who specialize in that. They really understand it. Whether it's a large language model, let's say using ChatGPT the way I used it, I don't know whether it's capable of doing that. I think there are other combinations of large language models coupled with image processing, let's say in the open world, where you can get closer to that. I don't think it's very far away at all, depending upon how discrete and clear the images are. I don't think it's very far away at all. I think it can be accomplished.
I think your example too of the picture with the living room, or what looked like a living room in the inventory,
Mm-hmm.
really opened my eyes too. Like home and contents insurance, right? Like I have to look into that again to renew very soon. And I'm thinking, all
Well,
right.
and I know the conversation for me has actually come up more than once about this use case, and it's around estate and estate planning.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got an elderly relative and you don't know what they have in their house, you don't know what they actually have, and it's good to have a clear list of what actually is there, so when bad things happen, at least you've got a list that you
Right.
can work off of.
Yeah.
There's another question here.
Oh, this one about bad actors.
Risk of bad actors using open source models for nefarious militia. Of course, yeah, they're they're using the large language models themselves to generate the phishing and security approaches to attack a firm. They're really good at that. They're really really smart. But the other side of it is some people are inserting, let's call it nefarious links into data that they know is going to be scraped or used in the generation of whether it's retrieval augmented generation would be an example, where it's an AI you built, it's going to use a large language model, but it's going to access through retrieval augmented generation data that you've scraped off of the web, and it exists within your, I'll call it your vector database. Now that link that it may have scraped off, it could be malicious. It itself could be a phishing attack. So that when your people use this system to do a search and it accesses this database and looks at the data that got pulled back, and they'll click on that link. And so we could go on and on about the different ways that it can be used offensively, and you know what, how it can be used defensively too, to detect phishing.
Any final thoughts in terms of like what generative AI is not that you want to clear the air on?
It's not a general intelligence. I was trying to come up with a really, really good analogy for what it is. It seems brilliant and incredibly stupid at the same time. Like and that's why I have a hard time describing it. I do believe in the next number of years, it's going to be much more intelligent as they move forward, and it will do a lot more. So right now, as I'm creating my systems, I have to provide what I would call the common sense aspects of the application. I need to use it like a tool set, like I described, to try and do that right now.
Okay.
So, but I don't want to scare people from using this. Use it.
Try.
Like really, really important. Use it if you haven't. I didn't look at the poll results. I should have, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's take a moment and do that. Let's see what, so in terms of the first one, is your organization actively exploring how to use Gen AI? We've got 50% of the answers saying, yes, absolutely. We have a number of projects underway, which is, that's really strong. Look. And then the other 50%, it's a mixed bag between the other three, talking about it. We'd like to, but we aren't really sure what to do. And then, 18% of respondents saying we're just not ready. We're still trying to figure out what Gen AI actually is.
Yep. Okay.
So that's
pretty impressive.
Yeah, 50% are actively pursuing projects. Okay, so what was the other one? Are you currently using ChatGPT or other large language models for your own use? And it looks like we've got 89% said yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really, really strong. I mean, my assumption is most of us here today are, with a bit of a tech background company that is more progressive. I'd be curious to know what the answers to those questions might be if we were to poll the larger, Manitoba business community. So
Yeah.
I think now it's to get them to be just as curious and experiment.
Well, enterprise clients are going to be using generative AI, I'd say, whether they know it or not, as they start adopting. A lot of them have enterprise agreements with Microsoft. So they'll be using Copilot for Word and PowerPoint and Excel and things of that. I'm not saying now, I'm saying in the next year or two.
Hmm.
So the exposure is coming. But
Yes.
90%, that I would have guessed about 90%. That would have been my guess.
So, Tim, we've had two more questions come in. Do you have time
Sure.
for
Yeah.
us to have a look? So one of them is, how is the level of audio learning in AI? Is it to the same level as image learning is now?
Uh, so when it comes actually maybe a qualification, audio learning. Um, the audio the audio aspects for generative AI that I look at, for the most part, are text to voice, voice to text, right? So a little bit of transcription, and then the other one is like text to voice, right? We were using text to voice going back a year or so ago, and we did some work with it. It was okay. You could do some neat things with it, but it's really like using things like 11 Labs or Play RT. You can I think it was Play RT, if I got that right. You could feed it, let's say, a paragraph, and it would be a 200 millisecond wait time before it started speaking it in the voice that you'd selected. So you got to record your own voice as a sample. So real advancements on that side, and advancements on the recognition side as well. So, but we're not like creating our own models for it. We're users of it. The last one, what are your thoughts on the intellectual property concerns when you're uploading items such as code from an organization to generative AI, like ChatGPT or Copilot? So when we started using in our internal systems development, we were using early versions of Copilot, but we were also using ChatGPT. And the internal systems we were using it for, I had no intellectual property concerns. Uh, if somebody wanted to understand how to create an invoice using C#, hey, good. Like I didn't care. To me, it wasn't IP that I cared about. As you're creating new systems, more enterprise systems, then I do start to get concerned, and I look to studying the agreements that you as a company have with the provider of the generative software. And the predominant thing you're looking for is, I'm using you, but none of the questions I asked, so now I'm talking to the robot company. I'm using you, I'm asking you to generate or analyze something for me. And whatever question I ask, or whatever data I provide, or whatever answer you provide, none of that gets turned back into training, right? You can't use it for your own training. So I just focus on the clause, basically. If I can't get a reasonable clause and the intellectual property I'm creating is sensitive, then no, then it's just out. Maybe then I go take a look at some local large language models for doing code generation, because then it's within my control. If you follow what I'm saying, if I'm using a code generation tool running on my large language model on my PC or within my building, I know that none of that is going back for training to somebody. So I'm not sure if that answers it perfectly. So but there was another about uploading. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
And I would also offer up that if anyone has any questions about IP, and if you have
Sure.
an AI-based business platform that you're putting together, North Forge's Elevate IP program, which has legal expertise around this very topic, is a great resource for us locally. So definitely check out the Elevate IP program that North Forge is running. Tim, I just have to say, Excellent information, so well presented. Thank you so much for taking time and sharing your expertise and online's experience with generative AI. I think if you want to come back and do any other follow-up conversations, presentations about the topic, if you want to talk more about lessons learned, use cases that you've got going on,
Yeah.
you're most welcome. It's been very informative.
Yeah. No, and thank you everybody for listening and bearing with me. I said at the outset, it's a broad topic.
Mhm.
And for my mind, that makes it kind of hard to stay on topic. So I need guardrails and my own guardrails on my large language model. But
We all do.
thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I believe that the virtual room will be open until 1:30. We'll be transported back to our tables as soon as presentation mode is over. We'll have, I think, a recording of Tim's presentation available in a short while that we can send out. And Shaylin also shared the YouTube link that Dr. Gerhard presented in October when he also talked about AI. So we have some wonderful resources showcasing the expertise we have here in Manitoba with our membership base. So thanks everyone for your interest, your time, and thank you again, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks so much.